Hi, everybody. I'm going to be going live in about 5 minutes. So I'm just waiting for everybody to come in. Thanks for joining me here. Hey, everybody. Welcome to my live stream. So there's no particular format for this. I just thought I'd share sort of what I'm up to, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking about. And if I do have time, I will try and answer some questions about what's, so you please ask them. I obviously can't get to all of them. But I just thought I'd share a few things. So if you haven't caught my latest video on fasting and kidney disease, that's up. So what I talk about is kidney disease, which is obviously very important to me because I'm a kidney specialist. So I did a previous video where they talked about the best treatments in terms of the fasting mimicking diet for diabetic kidney disease, which is one of the things that is, you know, sort of more obvious because fasting can really help with type 2 diabetes. And therefore, if you help with the type 2 diabetes, you actually start to reverse the kidney disease, which is very exciting. That research was in 2022. I did a video about it at the time because that was one of the first times I had actually seen a study that talked about it. But what was interesting in this next video that I just did is that they applied this. They did a small study in rats, and then they applied this to other diseases such as IgA nephritis, which is the most common primary kidney disease. So that's kidney disease that's not related to other diseases. So that was really exciting to me. And what they showed was that a lot of these inflammatory markers, maybe some of the autophagy, maybe it was reversing a lot of the fibrosis, which is the scarring that you get with chronic kidney disease. And that was pretty exciting to me. There's a question about what the fasting mimicking diet is, and what it is a very interesting sort of take on fasting. And the reason is that it's not actual fasting; it mimics fasting, but it's not actual fasting. But what it is a 5-day program every month. And what they do is give you a sort of prescribed meals, and they're basically designed to be lower in calories, but really low in insulin, so low in protein and so on. So the whole idea is that you get most of the benefits of fasting without actually fasting. And to their credit, of course, they've actually put a lot of money into research. They've got 20 or 30 studies with big universities everywhere, and that's why there's these studies coming out which are really interesting. So that was about fasting and kidney disease. So the some of the other things that are coming up is there's a doctor talks put on by the El Nutra, which is the company that does the fasting mimicking diet. There's a doctor talks. So I know the CEO there, and he's I really like what he's done. So I've agreed to help him out with some of the stuff that he's doing because he really believes in promoting fasting, which is sort of what I do. He wants to, of course, promote fasting mimicking. I don't actually care whether you do fasting mimicking or whether you do fasting straight. It doesn't matter to me. Both, I think, are reasonable. And because there's a lot of benefits with the fasting mimicking, I think it actually applies to both. What's interesting to me, of course, is that for a long time, I thought, well, if you're going to fast, you might as well fast. But actually, all the data that's coming out now uses a lot of fasting variations, which are things like the fasting mimicking, but also the 5-2 diet, which was popularized by Dr. Michael Mosley, where it's not a full fast again. So it's 5-2 is for 5 days of regular eating and 2 days of fasting, but it's not a full fast. You do 500 calories in those 2 days. So again, not fasting and great results. And there's also a Buchinger clinic in Germany where they do these 10-day supervised fasts. And again, not a full fast. They actually have, they do these, they give you a bit of food to go along with it. And they see great results too. So I think that's, I think that there's benefits all across the board. So I'm not a purist. I'm more about getting good results. So if it works for you, then go ahead and do it. And there's no reason to say, oh, you have to do a full fast or whatever. It doesn't make any difference. You can probably get most of the benefits for that. So that's coming up. Doctor Talks. I co-host that with Dr. David Jockers and also Dr. Joseph Antoon, who's with El Nutra. They're the ones putting it on. It should be free if you register, I think, something like that. So that's going to be in January. I did some interviews with some of my, favorite people. I had, Ben Bickman and Tro Kalajian and Brian Lenskis and Cynthia Thurlow. So a bunch of others. And, I'm sure there's going to be great. So these summits are free for registration, and they're just a bunch of things. They told me also that I'm going to be able to get the videos and to be able to put them on my YouTube channel. So if you don't want to join the summit, I'm supposed to be able to get those videos onto YouTube sometime in January or something like that. Along with that, I think I'm going to be doing a 5-day fasting challenge with them. They want me to help out again, and I'm happy to do that. Where we're going to all do together a 5-day fasting mimicking diet, or whatever you want to do. And I think that that's something in January after the holidays, where everybody could use a bit of a reset. Is a great time to start that. So I think that's coming up, and I think that's also going to be free as well. And I think every day there's like check-ins and stuff like that. So hopefully that's going to be a good experience, and we can do that. Also, at the fasting method, which is run by my colleague Megan Ramos, it came out of the clinic that Megan and I did together in Toronto. So prior to the fasting method, we actually worked in the same office together. She was a researcher and I was a physician. And they've put in, we spent a lot of time putting in together a new community program, which is the monthly program where we kind of guide people through the fasting. So far, people have been really enjoying that. So check that out, the fasting method. The fasting method has several levels. There's like personal coaching, which is the highest level. And then there's master classes, and there's this community level, which is sort of a monthly fee. And hopefully what we're trying to do is actually download the master class experience, which is a bit more expensive, and be able to offer it to sort of everybody at a lower price. So hopefully you can check that out. And then what I've been doing in the last little bit, I've been trying to get my clinic back up. So for those that don't know, the program I used to have with Megan Ramos was actually focused in my office on really getting together and being able to provide dietary advice to patients to reverse their type 2 diabetes. And it was very good. People, even today, like 8, 9 years later, people still come into my office and they go, "Hey, I remember when we used to do those things in the back of the office." Just the other day, a patient came in and he was like, "Yeah, I had this, and it was like, I had been on 100 units of insulin a day, and now I'm not on any, and those were great." So I had always wanted. Now Megan moved to California because her husband got a job there, so she took the whole program online. But then during COVID, the whole thing sort of got sort of pushed down. So I've been trying to restart that whole program, and finally I did get it started. I put together a whole new program, and I've been busy doing that. But the interesting part of that is that I have a 6-part series. What it is going to be, it's a clinic, so it's going to be called, hopefully, the Diabetes Code Clinic, where if you're in Toronto, you can be referred in. It does require a referral it's run by Dr. Tadi Boyina and myself. I do the dietary portion, but a lot of that's going to be through video and so on. So I'm recording some new videos. It's going to be a 6-part series called the Diabetes Code Clinic series. It's sort of a 6-part series on how to reverse type 2 diabetes. Sort of low carb and intermittent fasting is the focus, of course, but also on monitoring and some other things that we talked about on YouTube, things like, the addition of vinegar, eating late at night and trying to avoid that. If you haven't checked those videos, I actually think they're super, super interesting on how the food order, that is, if you eat the carbs first versus carbs last, that makes a big difference. And also how eating too late at night makes a difference. Vinegar makes a difference. Eating carbs alone versus carbs with proteins and fat makes a difference. So I think that those videos hopefully will be coming out. And again, if you're in the Toronto area, that's something that should be available. It's available now, but we're just trying to slowly ramp it up, and we're trying to get a nurse sort of involved, so that, because obviously I can't do all of this myself. So stay tuned for that. But again, a lot of the videos will be actually online. So hopefully we'll have lots of new stuff to watch in the new year in addition to that. Just wanted to see about some questions. So there's one here. It says, I'm having some issues with discipline with foods that spike blood sugar. What advice do you have? That's a tough one. So the foods that spike your blood sugars typically are refined carbohydrates. Okay, so if you eat like sort of refined flours, sort of like donuts and stuff like that, And they spike your glucose because they're highly refined. So if you eat an unprocessed carbohydrate, such as carrots or something like that, there's carbohydrates in there, but they're relatively not refined. So what happens is that your body has to work a little bit to digest it. Carbohydrates, remember, are chains of glucose. So they're in two forms, amylopectin and amylose. And they're long chains, like 2 million chains of glucose. Now, your body can't absorb the 2 million chains. It has to break them down into smaller pieces, like single glucose. What they do in refined carbohydrates is they grind that flour to a very, very fine dust. So, therefore, when you eat it, it gets absorbed right away. So you know this because if you take flour and you just throw it up in the air, it poofs and it stays up because it's so fine. The particles are so fine, as opposed to stone ground or unground, like whole grains and so on. So therefore, you absorb it. And you get this big spike in glucose. And a lot of these foods, if they have sugar and all this stuff, also release a lot of dopamine. So, dopamine is sort of this reward hormone in the brain. And that's why you get, like, when people talk about comfort foods, it's comforting because it releases neurotransmitters that are pleasurable. So, that they activate the reward system. So, that's no wonder you have cravings for those things that spike your blood glucose. It's not by accident. And of course, the food companies have really figured out the best way to sort of make these foods so that you don't do them. And really, there's several related topics here, which I hope to cover in future posts, like on medium.com. There's food cravings and emotional eating. And this is, I think, a topic that probably doesn't get talked about enough because people always talk about, you know, um, foods like calories and proteins and carbs and so on. But nobody addresses the fact that if you were to ask somebody, why do you eat? People eat not because they want nutrition. That's like the least of their worries. It's usually because of two things. Why? One is either you're hungry, in which case then you can look at different things, such as you can eat foods that are more satiating, for example. So if you eat steak and eggs for breakfast versus if you eat white bread and jam, it might be the same calories, but they don't have the same effect in terms of keeping you full. They did a great study on this. I covered it in one of these videos about refined carbohydrates, where they compared, Dr. David Ludwig compared two groups, one who ate instant oats and one that ate steel cut oats. The instant oats has a very high glycemic index. The steel cut oats have a sort of medium glycemic index. So remember that they have the same calories, they're the same carbohydrates, and they're actually the same food, but they're prepared differently. And because the instant oats are ground so fine, you get this huge spike in glucose, huge spike in insulin, then it crashes, and then you get hungry later. Then they measured how much people ate afterwards. And it turns out that those people who had the instant oats ate way more, like 50% more at lunch. So, of course, that makes a difference because it's not keeping you full. So the whole point is that these big spikes is exactly what the food companies are looking for, because they keep you in line because you get this release of dopamine. Therefore, if you're feeling like depressed or something, you go for these comfort foods, which is not like salmon or something, right? Comfort foods are things that are usually highly refined to get you this spike of dopamine. So if you're eating because you're depressed, well, that's totally different than eating because you're not eating satiating foods, in which case you then need to start to look into that problem. Same thing with food cravings, another topic that's gaining more and more attention. And the thing is that cravings are, by definition, something that you know is not good for you, but you eat it anyway, sort of like alcohol or cocaine. You know that alcohol is not good for you, you do it anyway because you're addicted. And the last thing you need is somebody saying that you should drink less alcohol or you should eat less cocaine or whatever it is. It's just not that useful. So understanding food cravings is critical, because if you think that shouting at somebody saying eat fewer calories, which is what a lot of doctors do, it's like that's the least useful advice. That's like saying cheer up, right? It's like never cheers anybody up to hear that, right? So the whole point is that if you're having problems with the foods that spike your blood glucose, you're not alone. It's because these foods have been designed to do it. So all you can do when you're trying to deal with cravings, when you're trying to deal with addictions, is actually to cut it out completely. Just like alcohol. Nobody says, well, just drink a little less alcohol and you'll cure your addiction. No, because that little bit leads to more and more and more. And sometimes you just have to say, okay, that's it. And this is where, being able to talk to people is useful. If you're trying to deal with cravings and so on, it's not always the easiest thing to just go cold turkey. And what sometimes is more effective is to switch that to something else. That is, if you are addicted to nicotine and smoking, for example, you don't necessarily have to go cold turkey. You can switch it to chewing gum, for example, which is related, but not nearly as bad for you. But it still gives you something to do with your eat. So, you might want to switch to something else, such as instead of eating chips and stuff, you make the conscious decision that every time I want to do this, I will have, a cup of tea, or if you want something crunchy, I will have celery sticks, or I will have this, or whatever it is, right? And then you just do that until you get over it, right? So sometimes it's easier to switch that addiction to something else, and those are, some of the really important things. And remember, the other thing about refined carbohydrates is that they tend to make the problem worse because, again, in that study that I referred to with the instant oats and the steel cut oats, is that not only do those high glycemic index, so I'm talking here about instant oats and white bread and those sort of highly refined cookies and donuts and all this sort of stuff, you get this initial huge spike in glucose, which gives you this huge spike in insulin. But what happens is that it crashes afterwards. So the glucose goes down below normal after a couple of hours because all that insulin has pushed all the glucose out. So if your blood glucose is at a normal level before, it goes up very high and then it goes down, but it goes down way below normal, which doesn't happen with the normal foods like the low, unrefined foods and so on. So then as it goes below normal, what you get is symptoms of hypoglycemia. And this is the hangry feelings. And because when your blood glucose is low, your body wants to get some more glucose to correct the problem. So people get these things such as the cravings, the shakiness, and the hunger. So you get hungry. So again, even if you're taking the same calories, the same carbohydrates, but it's the way the food is the so-called food matrix, which is how the food is actually encased. It makes a huge difference, how it is. So eating those unrefined carbohydrates is actually much different than eating refined carbohydrates. And that's why these things are so dangerous. And that's actually why, again, a topic that is gaining sort of increasing momentum is the ultra processed foods. So ultra processed foods, of course, are sort of designed to make you want more, to sort of circumvent the sort of satiety mechanism so you can eat more so that they can sell more. So it's really it's really an interesting topic, and I hope to have some time to go into that stuff more. But again, I do touch on these topics on YouTube, and also you can check medium.com, which is where I keep my blogs. Unfortunately, medium.com changed a little while ago. So they put everything behind a paywall. And so when I usually release a new article, watch for my Twitter feed, because I usually tweet the link to the friend link, which lets you get behind the paywall and read the article. But if you're finding it later on, then you may or may not be able to do it. So keep a lookout for that. Thanks so much for that question. I'll try and get to a few other questions here. Can you touch upon eating late at night? This is, again, a super interesting question. because there's actually a lot of data. There's a couple of problems when you eat late at night. And we're talking about the big um, meal late at night. So you have to understand that there are cultures that do eat late at night. If you go to Spain, for example, they never, have dinner until like 9, right? 9:30. So all us North Americans who go over there are like, we're going to bed at 9. You try and get a table at 6 o'clock, you can't get it. So anyway, but they eat a small meal late at night. And the problem with it is twofold. One is that hunger tends to be highest late at night. So if you just take average people and you measure their hunger levels, it actually fluctuates. And on average, people are the least hungry at 8 a.m. and the most hungry at 8 p.m. So in the evening. So if you're eating when you're the most hungry, you're going to tend to eat more. So that's a big problem. The second big problem is that if you take the same foods and you eat one in the morning and one at night, the one at night actually produces much more insulin. So, same food, same exact meal, eaten at two different times has a completely different, not completely, but a different insulin effect. And it's insulin which drives weight gain, right? So if you eat steak and eggs in the morning versus steak and eggs at night, it's different because the steak and eggs at night produces more insulin. Why? Because in the morning, there's a lot of these counter regulatory hormones which have gone up. They actually spike in the early morning, and that's why you're not that hungry. But it also sort of counteracts that effect of insulin. So, therefore, you're not getting as much insulin effect for whatever you eat in the morning versus at night. So, the third thing is that when you eat late at night, you can't make up for it, right? So if you eat a huge breakfast, right? And they've done studies where they sort of change, have this huge meal and put it early versus late. The thing is that if you eat a huge breakfast, sometimes that's a good thing because then you don't eat much later on at night. So you've made up for it because you've been able to reduce all your subsequent meals to compensate for that big giant breakfast that you had. If you eat a big giant dinner, you don't have that ability to reduce the calories that you take because you've eaten your breakfast, you've eaten your lunch, and then you have this giant late dinner. And then what happens is that you just go to sleep. Well, what is your body going to do with it? Well, it's going to have to store it, right? Which is body fat or blood sugar. So for a couple of good reasons that sort of late carb heavy late night dinner is like a killer, right? You're much better off eating it early. The problem is that it doesn't fit into people's sort of life schedule so much. So if you think about how our working day is scheduled, it's very difficult to always have a big breakfast and no dinner, right? Dinner is where we tend to have, the kids are home from school, you're with your spouse, you're going out with friends, whatever it is, it tends to be in the evening. So that's why our sort of modern way that we do things is it doesn't really jive with what we're supposed to do. But the late night eating is one of the things that you should try to avoid if you possibly can. It's better to have a big sort of midday meal and then very little at dinner. But again, that typically is not how the working day schedule goes. So, I think that it's just a matter of trying to fix that. Let me see. There's a question about what do you think of keto? Keto is one of these things that I've always thought plays. It can be great, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to do it. So keto is one of these things where it's very low in carbohydrates, but other people have had low carbohydrate diets before. They tend to be higher in protein, whereas the keto diet is more lower in very low in carbohydrates, but also low in protein or adequate protein, so very high in dietary fat. And it became very popular sort of in the mid 2010s. And I think it can be useful because a lot of people have lost weight with it. The problem is that it can be a very restrictive sort of a diet, so it's not the easiest diet in the world to follow. So I think that one of the things is that if you can follow it, then probably great. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I tend not to do it that much myself because it's so restrictive, and I tend to use more of the fasting, which is more about flexibility. That is, you can cover up a lot of sins, dietary sins, if you do more fasting, right? Because in the end, you can always give your body the chance to burn it all off. On the other hand, if somebody really enjoys keto or carnivore or whatever, I actually think there's nothing wrong with it. There was all these people that tried to come out and say it's bad for your heart and all this. I think that was a little bit overblown, but I certainly don't. I don't have a problem with it. It seems to be a little bit less popular than it used to be, but I think it has its place, and certain people are studying it for things like psychiatric disease. So Dr. Chris Palmer, who wrote a book called Brain Energy, and that sort of thing. It's all very interesting. I think a lot of good stuff to do. So let me see if there's another question here that I can see. Sorry, I just have to. What are your thoughts of taking berberine? Berberine is not that popular in Canada. It's used more in the United States, and it has a mechanism very similar to metformin. So I think that some people find that their blood sugars do better with berberine, and some people do find a benefit. But on the whole, it's neither sort of here nor there. It can be useful, but it's sometimes for the blood sugars in the same way that metformin is. Some people do feel a lot better with it, but on the other hand, it's as a supplement, it sort of has limited power. So weight loss, intermittent fasting is much better, I think, to do, and it's a lot more flexible to do. um, and let's see if there's this other question here. And one meal a day, how much time to reverse insulin resistance and weight loss per month? That's a hard question because again, it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody reacts differently to things. So overall, it depends. If your insulin resistance is high, then it's going to take longer. If you do more fasting, then it's going to take be faster. If you're eating sort of low carb and doing the intermittent fasting already, then that's really something that can be reverse quickly. But on the other hand, it all depends on where you started from. So it's sort of it's difficult to answer. I've had people who had severe diabetes, and the minute they started with the intermittent fasting, they actually reversed it super super quickly. So it can actually reverse quickly. I wrote up a paper at the beginning in 2018 where I had a patient who was on 100 units a day and 100 units a day of insulin, and within a month of starting the intermittent fasting had just completely reversed. So it can reverse quickly. Is there an age for intermittent fasting? I generally recommend, first of all, fasting is just part of a regular eating schedule. So remember that when you fast, it's just a time that you don't eat. So there's a period you should eat, there's a period you should not eat. And the regular, normal sort of fasting period should be about 12 to 14 hours. If you eat dinner at, say, 7 p.m. and you have breakfast at, say, 7 a.m. or 9 a.m., you're talking 12 to 14 hours that you should be doing sort of every single day without doing it. And that applies to kids as well as everybody else, which is kind of funny because, 14 hours a day is just, for example, eating dinner at 7 p.m. and eating breakfast at 9 a.m. And I think pretty much everybody agrees that that's not very harmful. But I just remember that study, that crazy study where they looked at the intermittent fasting and they said, oh, fasting for 16 hours causes a 91% increase in heart disease, which is crazy. This 14-hour fast was supposed to be associated with a 66 or 62% increase in heart disease, which again is just ridiculous because that's just what people should be doing all the time. And that's really why it's called breakfast. It's the meal that breaks your fast. So I think that that period now, if you start going beyond 14, 16 hours, then, I generally say, for adults, 18 above, because you want to make sure that you're not limiting your nutrients. Although if you do it longer once in a while, it doesn't matter because, if you're from a while ago, you might remember that a very popular punishment for naughty boys, particularly, was to get sent to bed without dinner. So if you went to bed without dinner, it means you ate at lunchtime and you didn't eat till breakfast time. So you're talking about almost 20 hours of fasting. And that was like tons and tons of kids all over the United States and Canada had to go to bed without dinner every so often. And of course, nothing really bad happened. So it's just interesting because there's so many, naysayers and doomsday sayers back then. It was just sort of very funny. But, I was talking to somebody the other day, a doctor, and I was talking to him about fasting, and I was telling him, how everybody was always like, "Oh, you can't fast, you can't fast," and he sort of said, "Oh, no, I don't think anybody disagrees that it can be useful." I'm like, you should have seen like 8 years ago. It was like I was like, everybody's telling me I was crazy, right? It's like, nah. Anyway, it was quite funny. So thanks to everybody for joining me, and I'll try to do these once a month just to keep you guys up to date on what I'm doing and answer any questions. If you are able to join the community, look on the YouTube channel. I'll tell you when the date and time is for the next one. And there's a community there. I appreciate the support, and if there's also super chats and stuff on YouTube that you can use. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.